Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. This is the podcast where we help you challenge your mindset and discover where you are. Tired of stories about other people's success? We can help you change your life, determine your time freedom point, and join us on the journey to financial success. Let's go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ideal Investor Show, where we have another episode with a great guest who has very, very broad knowledge and experience in the field of finance and investing and so forth. So say hello to Amanda Sharratt.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So before we dive into a little bit more details on what your company at Whittaker Myers is actually providing to your clients, tell us a little bit, how did Amanda Sharratt actually get to what she's doing all day long these days?
Yeah, it was from a personal experience, actually. So I didn't set out to actually be a financial advisor or the chief operating officer, but I, started our life out. My husband and I started our life out like a lot of people, probably very much in debt. And my mother-in-law realized that and sent us through a class at our church. And we were reluctant at first because we were like, we got it, mom. We're paying our bills. We're fine. But we did it. And it ended up changing our lives because we paid off the debt. But so much so that I was like, people need to know about this. So I became a financial coach, helping people one-on-one, paying off debt and budgeting and just more lifestyle type things. And just a natural progression of my career, I just had a desire to want to help people more. And I became a financial advisor and have been doing that for several years now. So, just really am passionate about the topic of helping people feel confident in their money.
Okay, very cool. Now, you said you're Chief Operating Officer at Whittaker Myers. Is that your company, or did you join the company, or how did that come together?
I joined the company. So actually the way that I got started here was I found our president as an advisor of our own. And as I was coaching people and got them ready to start saving for retirement, they were like, who should I go to? And I said, this is who we use. And so we would refer that way. So then when I decided that I wanted to pursue becoming a financial advisor, I just called him and said, hey, what's a day in the life look like? And that sort of thing. And at the end of the conversation, he said that I could come join here if I was interested in that. So it just was really a natural progression.
Very cool. And I saw on your website that you have 3 different addresses for your headquarters, but all of them in Ohio. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we help people all across the country and we have offices all across the country, but our headquarters are all here in Ohio.
Kind of cool because both myself and a number of our clients have properties in Ohio. So there is a
Okay.
connection. I went to college in Ohio in Yellow Springs, so there's a little bit of a connection
Yeah.
there. Have you always been in Ohio, or did you move there to join the company?
I've always been in Ohio. Actually, maybe kind of a boring life, always been right around this area. Only maybe moved about 30 minutes away, and then now we're back closer to where we grew up.
Oh, okay, that sounds good. Now, to start a little bit about the conversation of the services that you guys provide, you said you, and I think you mentioned your partner, you were in quite a bit of debt. Can you describe how that came about?
Yeah, it was mostly student loans and mostly my husband's student loans. So he went to a private out of state engineering school. It's just very niche and very, very expensive. We were in $141,000 of debt. And, again, we were basically, we also had our house. So that was not including our house. And we were basically paying 2 mortgages, is what we said, because it was just so much debt. But we were making the payments. So we felt like everything is fine until we had that wake up call, and then we were able to pay it off in 3.5 years.
Okay, cool. And that is obviously very impressive. And our audience members might say, oh, well, Amanda, if you make 500,000 a year, then anybody can pay 140,000 in 3 years, no problem. Was that the case, or how did you do it?
No, when we started paying off our debt, we made 77 combined. And then we actually just showed our daughter, we did our debt free scream on the Dave Ramsey show when we paid off our debt. And so we just actually watched it. So it's fresh in my mind. We were started out making 77, and at the end of our journey, we were making 114. So it was good income, I would say, but it was not like you're saying, it was not like we made $500,000. It was really just being intentional with the money.
Right, yeah, I was just teasing you a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it makes you smile, I like that, so that's cool. Basically, you were starting out slightly above what is today's average. I looked it up recently, I think it's like 68,000 for a married couple or something like that as an average in the US, so you were a little bit above it, but not, like, super high. Are you saying basically you had ramen soup for 3 years or something, or how did you do it?
Well, we did eat more than ramen soup, but I mean, I would say we were very intense. So much so that my dad, he kind of thought we were strange, and every time I would see him, he'd be like, "Do you need me to buy you a cheeseburger? Like, are you doing okay?" And it was like, "No, Dad, we could buy our food. We're just really trying to be intense." But that came over time. So that was one of the mistakes I made early in coaching was I would meet with people and I could see that they could make this happen really fast. So I would take their budget and I would just redline everything. Like, stop doing this. And then what I realized was that's not how we started and that's not how anybody starts. You've got to do it, you've got to own it and you've got to see the progress to then be willing to make the cuts. So we ended a lot more intense than where we started because we saw it working and we were willing to make those sacrifices because we knew like if we do this then we're going to achieve this goal a little bit faster.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I always admire people, especially when you have the opportunity to do it relatively early in life, to go through that process, because I think the longer you get into maturity, to some extent it gets a little harder, like when you have kids and you have a whole bunch of stuff, and that may not be just student debt and the mortgage, it may be a bunch of cars and credit cards and all kinds of other things that have accumulated, even if you make all the payments. Now, I'm kind of curious because somebody listening to us might say, "Hey, Axel, you're just putting on a good show because you're pretending that you're not a fan of leverage," which I absolutely am. So I want to talk maybe a little bit with you about it. You mentioned you had student debt, which is a little bit debatable where the equity comes from. I hope your husband got like a fabulous job, so his debt in the engineering got paid off 100 times over or something. Then you also mentioned you had a mortgage. So can you kind of give a little bit of your views and for the audience and what you're thinking about the two different, or there are more other different kinds of debt to get rid of and why?
That's a good question. So we really followed the class that we took was Financial Peace University, and there's baby steps aligned in there. And so we followed those baby steps. And so what that says is it kind of breaks out two categories of debt, if you will. So your primary home, your mortgage is separate from all of the other debt. So student loans, car loans, credit cards, all of those things, all of the consumer debt. And so that was really what we did was we just focused on paying off those things at least first, and again, most of it was student loans, but we had some credit cards in there. We had some car loans in there. We had a few other things in there. I mean, we were not afraid of debt. We had some furniture in there. Like it was just, we were very normal of just financing everything. And so, really, what that did was just free up that. And what it did for us was say, now there is not as much risk, right? Because I understand everybody has different opinions, but for us, it was just really the freedom that comes with not having to pay a bunch of payments every month. And when you have debt, you just have a lot going out. And so we do still have our primary home, our mortgage on that. But all of the everything else we pay cash for and we don't have debt.
Okay, yeah, that's very cool. Now, you mentioned the term freedom, and that's a very important term in the ideal wealth grower world as well. We're actually helping people to reach what we call the time freedom point, where they have the freedom to decide, do I still want to do my regular work, or do I want to basically live with the positive cash flow that I'm generating and do other things that may not pay that much. From that perspective, I would like to ask you, and if you say no, that didn't apply, that's fine too. But I'm kind of suspecting you said it took you 3 years to get really into reducing and eliminating that consumer debt. To what extent did the habits, and maybe you can describe if you allow you then after the numbers got to zero and you did the screaming and all that stuff, life goes on, right? Like you didn't just say, okay, now let's find that Caribbean island with a beach and do nothing anymore. So how did the process allow you to develop habits that sustained you after?
I would say that while we were paying off our debt, we were really intense and we did not do a lot of the extra things. And so what that did was when we paid off our debt, then it was like, oh, we've been putting all of these other things on hold. And so we had to catch up on that, but we already had the habits in place to be able to be intentional with the money. And then as we have gotten caught up on that and our income has grown and we don't have debt, there are times where we have the lifestyle creep come in, right? And we start realizing it. But what is really nice is those habits are still very much inside of us that we can go back to them. So when we realize, like, we're buying on Amazon for no reason and we really need to cut back on that, we have those skills. Like we can go back to that and go, yeah, we need to be more intentional with this, talk about this before we spend the money. And it really just, not that you're going to be perfect because nobody is, it really just sets that foundation for you to know how to do it and go back to those skills when you need to. And also just the communication. If you are married, I mean, we did this early in our marriage, and that helped us to communicate not only about money, but all the other problems that we've encountered throughout our marriage. We really believe it's helped us communicate better throughout those because built that foundation of talking about this really hard topic of money that isn't easy to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really critical point that you're making. And, how did you overcome that urge to get all the shoes and all the fancy clothes and stuff that women supposedly want to get?
Yeah, well, I'm very much the spender in our household. And so it really was just about building. I always say saving is a muscle. You have to save a little until you can save a lot. And so once I started just building that muscle and understanding that, like, there is this, again, sense of freedom and peace that comes with having an emergency fund and having money set aside, that outweighed the need or want to buy stuff. So I still, again, that's my natural, is like I want to buy things, but what I've learned is I need to put limits on myself. And that helps because it's like it's not that I can't go shopping. It's just like keep it inside this limit. You don't need to go crazy. so so
Right,
I've
right.
just tried to take my natural personality and put a little bit of boundaries around it, I think.
So for those limits, how often would you say, and maybe weave it also in as a recommendation for our audience members, how often do you check whether you are within your limits or not?
Yeah, a couple times a month we check in. So we do a budget, and then I still do the old school balance the checkbook. Now we do it with an app, but I want to make sure that I'm tracking my transactions, but I also want to make sure that there's no identity theft or anything happening, and I want to make sure that I know that, like, what I spent is actually what's coming out of the bank and the amounts are right. And so I know that, like, people don't really balance their checkbook anymore, but I can't recommend it enough because there's been so many times where I've caught even a few dollars. We didn't buy this, and we
Oh
can
yeah,
get that money
definitely.
back.
Yeah.
So I keep
Actually,
checking.
I oftentimes say in a way, and I mean this is probably ingrained in my marriage by now because we have been business owners for so long. And as a business owner, you obviously want to have a need to have a balance sheet or a P&L, however you want to describe it. So
Yeah.
in that sense, like my wife has always paid very close attention to this, but it's also a natural thing for a business owner. So if you look at your whole expense structure more like a business, as if you were to run a business that generates a certain amount of revenue that comes in every month, and then you have expenses against it, and you basically look at what's the balance at the end. So I'm kind of curious when Amanda goes on one of her Amazon binges, what do you do then afterward?
So what I really do is just try to see where I can pull money from. So like if I had, money in my spend that I didn't spend, or if I had other things, I try and balance it out. And sometimes it's just like, oh, I went over and I just need to be better next month, and that sort of thing. So it's really just, again, being aware and seeing how you can adjust the budget. And I think that's the other thing I would say along those lines of, like, we dealt with infertility during the time that we paid off our debt. And so that was expensive. And we were also paying off our debt. And we've had other things come up since then. But what I think this whole process does for you is it helps you to really be able to restructure your budget and cut out things and make room for things as they come up so that you have that emergency fund if you need it. But you almost find that because you're getting really good about managing your monthly budget, you don't have to dip into it very often because you can kind of restructure things or say, yeah, we can cancel this for this time or that sort of thing.
That's very good, and thanks for describing that because that's a little bit similar to what I always say to our investors when it comes to the residential real estate investing that we're helping them with. Obviously, especially when you use leverage like a mortgage, then you need to have a homeowner's insurance. And I obviously recommend to have a relatively high or maximum deductible, something like $5,000 if you can get it, which keeps the premiums low from the expense
Okay.
perspective. But it
Yeah.
also means if something happens that costs $4,000 to repair, the money needs to come from somewhere, right? And so we are recommending that people, for each of the properties, until they have four or five, put basically the premium that they would have to pay as deductible as a reserve. And then when you get to a number like 15, 20, 25,000, then obviously, like in my case, I have more than 10 properties. It's not very likely that all 10 need a $4,000 or $5,000 repair all in the same month, right? So there
Yeah.
is, I call it the pivot point when the reserve is big enough to cover. But to your point, I agree. Even though I take my own example and I'm preaching this to all our clients, I have it and it's more a peace of mind because I really have to say very rarely do we really tap into, because if there's like a $500 or $1,000 repair, we just take it out of the running cash flow instead of tapping in and selling a CD or selling some
Yeah.
sort of reserve asset. I mean, obviously, we don't want to just have it sit in a savings account for 0.5% or something like that.
Right.
So pivoting a little bit from how do you actually get yourself into, like, I would say, financial consciousness, so to speak, of what comes in and what goes out and what's my PLL or PNL or my balance sheet. Your organization at Whittaker Myers is obviously helping people then to take the next step. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of a portfolio you're suggesting for people, or how you help people after they basically gotten maybe to a similar state that you are?
So a lot of the people that come to us are also following those same principles that we talked about from Ramsey Solutions. And so what they're looking to do is they've paid off their debt, they've built their emergency fund, and they want to start saving 15% of their income or whatever is appropriate for them. And what we do is we really think that financial plans are important. I always like to say that that's the answer to, are you going to be okay in retirement? Which I think is the question we're all asking, right? Like, we're working towards this goal, but are we going to achieve it? Are we going to be okay? And so we do financial plans, and what that helps us to say, okay, here's your goals, here's the right recommendations for you. So we don't have like a blanket recommendation, but we say this is what needs to happen for you to achieve your goals, because everybody's financial situation is different as far as how much money they already have saved, how much money they need in retirement, when they want to retire, all of those things. So that's really what we do, is just kind of look at it holistically and say, let's take a look at where you're at and where you're headed and what changes need to happen to get there.
Okay, yeah, that's very cool, and I think that's also very sensible. And I mean, we are obviously both in, well, your company and my company, we're both in the position and obviously want to help people not only to retire early, but also be financially free and independent and safe. I wonder, are you leaning more towards the FIRE movement ideas, or can real estate be part of it? And is leverage allowed? Can you say a little bit about that?
We don't really focus a lot on the fire movement unless the client is interested in that. So if they come to us and they're wanting that, then we can talk through that. But the reality is, a lot of the clients that we see, at least, are just kind of, I would say, the normal track of retirement. And when they want to retire, maybe a little bit early, but still in that, quote unquote, normal retirement age. We don't talk to clients about leverage and using debt. Our stance is more paying off the debt. So that is really where we talk through, is like, when is it appropriate to get your home paid off? And then of course we do have clients that want real estate, but their goal is to pay cash for the real estate. So that's the track that we talk with clients.
Okay, and that makes sense. Can you say a little bit what gives people that intention to pay off the debt on investment properties?
Yeah, I go back to the risk. So just a lot of people that's how I feel, and that's how a lot of people that I talk to feel, of just they want that freedom of not having any debt. And just, of course, the paying cash for real estate is great because that can be part of their retirement plan for income that way. But if they don't have a renter and they don't have a payment on it, it's okay. They're not stressed about it. I mean, like what you said is great. No matter what, having that emergency fund for it, I think that is a great idea as well. But just if they don't have any debt at all, it lowers the risk and gives them more flexibility and freedom is how we view it, and many of our clients view it.
Cool. And so, what do you think about there's a guy that I really respect? You may have heard about him. His name is Keith Weinhold, and he's always saying, and I think the topic is correct. He always said equity is not generating any returns. So when you take that to say, okay, somebody buys a property for $150,000 cash, now you have basically, assuming even it wouldn't increase in value, you have $150,000 equity sitting there that's not really doing anything. I mean, I know you said risk, but risk is something that I think needs to either be managed or mitigated, right? So I could, for example, argue to say, well, if somebody really wants to reduce the risk, maybe you should get a non-recourse kind of financing rather than a traditional FHA or some kind of other DSCR type mortgage or so forth, because the reason it's non-recourse is because it's only 50% of the value, but then at least 50% of your equity is working, and somebody else is paying it off for you, than you having it sit in the asset and not doing anything.
I guess our view, or I'll speak to my view in particular, is just again, yeah, I see what you're saying of like, the equity's not doing anything for you, but I would say it is if you have a renter in there and you're getting money that way, and then that is all profit in my mind. I mean, again, you got all the expenses that go into real estate,
Right.
so it's not all profit. But
you have them either way. You're right. I would say, yes, you're right. Basically, the cash flow after expenses is obviously higher when you own it free and clear versus having a mortgage on it. But on the other hand, there's also a little bit to be said. I would wonder how you think about that on the timeline, right? If I have a 45-year-old client who wants to use the money they have to build a portfolio and have it paid off by other people, right? Which is basically what the tenants would be doing. And let's say you go only with a 50% non-recourse financing, it's probably the safest way you can do unless you buy cash. Then it would be probably very realistic to say, okay, well, at 60 or 65, like you said, regular retirement age, the properties would be paid off, but you could have twice as many that now generate retirement income for you than only buying one or two, because if you buy cash, then you have to basically the maximum expense on the front.
yeah, I mean, I think really what we're saying here is like it's a personal decision on how much risk you want to take out. And if you want to go with cash, then you just have to know that that is a slower process, right? The speed of cash it just is a slower process. I say
Yeah.
that in general with everything that my husband and I, what we realized is the quote unquote hard part about living debt free is now you got to pay cash for everything. And so it's not just we wake up and we say, oh, we need windows. It's we need to be really thinking about that in advance. And so it definitely, if you have that standpoint and that's your values, I would agree with you. It does take longer, and maybe you can't achieve as much, certainly as quickly as somebody else that's going to use leverage.
Right, absolutely. I think one important aspect, and I was wondering if you would say it, but I hope you don't mind me saying it. What I think people need to be somewhat aware of is how expensive is the money that you're actually using, right? And what I mean by that is inflation. So are those kind of considerations something that you do in your financial planning?
What I always tell clients is there's this matter of here's what we're hearing, here's what my belief is individually, but everybody is an adult and has their own decisions. And just because somebody's opinion is different than mine doesn't mean I'm not going to help them, right? And if that's their goal or they're talking through. And I mean, to your point, what I thought about when you were saying that is my husband has a big goal of owning significant amount of land. He likes to hunt, and so we would like to have land. And so we get in this conversation of it's going to be a while before we can pay cash for that. And is there going to be land? Because people are buying it up to build houses all
Right.
over the place. So there is this conversation around that as well with us. And because again, I guess that goes back to what I said is if that's really a value of yours, then you have to know going at the speed of cash is going to take more time. There's going to be more hurdles, all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I really love when I reviewed your website in preparation of our conversation today, that you put a really big emphasis on teaching people and educating people, not just on how to budget, but pretty much the way it looks to me on all the different aspects so that they can make an informed decision. And I think in that sense, my organization, we are kind of making up for the lack of education in the school system right? In
Yes.
some sense, and it's never too late to learn about it, and then allow people to say, okay, it makes sense for me because I want, that land now. And if I want the maximum size, I have to use leverage, especially if I'm afraid that the nice place I want to get is no longer there if I wait too long, right? But it should also not be a FOMO kind of thing. It should be really an informed decision, I'm sure.
Yes, exactly. I think you're 100% correct. It's just more about, and that goes with anything with us, is I always tell clients, like, when I'm talking to them about mutual funds or ETFs or what we recommend for them to invest in, I want them to understand it, not maybe to be able to explain it to the level that I can, but to more what I tell them is, I would never want you to say, I don't know, Amanda just put me in something. I don't know what I did with my money. Like, I want you to be informed and be on board and deciding this, because like you said, I think education is what helps people to feel confident, because we didn't learn this in school, not to the extent of that we should have, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I really so easily getting on my soapbox when somebody speaks about 401k plans, right? Not because the assets that are in there are in some way bad assets or something. Some maybe, some probably aren't. But the whole notion that first you don't learn something about it in school, you might get yourself in all kinds of financial debt situations that you didn't really intend and didn't understand. Then you finally get a job, so you have maybe at least theoretically the ability to start paying something off, but your company is telling you, don't really understand it, just give it to this Fidelity organization account that we signed a contract with. They're going to take care of it for you, right? I've met so many people when I say, so what is happening to your contribution every month? Do you have any idea? I don't know I should ask you, if it's different, but for me, most of the time they say, no, they just take it. And I was asked if I'm low, medium, and high risk, and that's what they do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know, a lot of the 401k plans default to the target date fund if you don't make a decision. And so, yet similar, it's like we ask questions, and they don't know. They don't know if it's Roth or pre-tax, and really just comes down to the education. Like you said, in onboarding, they just get paperwork that, I don't know, I'm supposed to fill this out, and
Yeah,
I get a
exactly.
match. And yeah. So I agree. There's not enough
Yeah. Well,
education.
I have had several people that have been clients of ours for a while, and then they change jobs. And then they totally frantically call me and say, hey, I'm at this new jobs and I'm talking to an HR and I just stepped out real quick. They asked me if I should roll it over or not. So that's the first time I'm thinking about what am I doing with all this money that I've spent the last 10 years every month.
Yeah, saving into, yeah.
Okay, cool. So if people want to learn from you how to do this, if they're intrigued to have minimum or no risk, basically, if they ultimately get to the point that you and your husband got to basically get rid of all the consumer debt, what do they do? How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. We, on our website, I'm sure you saw, we do a lot of YouTube videos and articles on there that share content. So that's all free. I would hope that people would check that out. But you can also go there to reach out to us as well. So that's whitakerwealth.com.
whitakerwealth.com, and we're going to put that in the show notes for sure so that people can easily find it. All right, so I always have two questions at the end that are not really related to investing and stuff like that. So the first one would be, if you had a time machine, where would you go and why?
Well, I think I would go backwards a few years to my daughter maybe being before she started school, because I'm at this age where she's 8 and she's starting to say in 10 years I'm going to be 18, and I'm just feeling like, oh, have I spent enough time? Have I done all the things? I know we have 10 years still, but it's all of the things that parents told me before I had kids, I'm starting to see is true, that how much time slips. So as hard as the toddler years are, it was so nice. I could just pick her up and put her on my hip. I can't do that anymore. So I honestly would go back to that time.
That's very cool. That makes a lot of sense. I wish I would have documented more stuff. I took some pictures and some little videos and stuff and so forth. That's a good one. I really appreciate that. Now, the second and last final question is, if you could meet anybody, who would it be and why?
I would say Oprah. I just think she's so interesting. I'd love to just sit down and talk to her.
Well, do you know anything you would ask her?
I think I would ask her about her business, how she built it, why she built it, the skills that it took. I know she shares some of that, but just like the intimate details of like, what did you do every day? We just were in our team meeting, and one of our team members said, are ordinary people that do things consistently every day. And so it's like, what are those things that she did consistently every day? Because I just think she's really built something and made a lot of impact on people.
You're absolutely right. I think an interesting aspect, and it's not just Oprah, I would say for people that we know, when we hear the name to associate with something typically successful, typically business oriented, I would wonder, and what if I came along with you to say, at what point while you were employed did you realize, and what were the indications to say, I can do this better by myself? That's really the way, especially with her, she was very successful as an employee. And I'm pretty sure, I'm not a particular Oprah fan or expert or anything like that, but there are many other similar examples where people were relatively, especially in the media and entertainment industry, successful. And so I'm sure there's something with Oprah where she at some point must have realized, you know what, this is crap, I can do this better. But I wonder what the trigger was. That would be cool to find out.
And when you say that too, I would say, I know you only told me one, but as you're saying that, I thought the other one is Candace Cameron Bure. So she was DJ on Full House. And I love her spiritual side too. She's not afraid to profess her love for Jesus, and I admire that because that's hard in her industry. And she did something similar. She went off on her own and built a business. And so, yeah, just the impact, I think, is just how did you do that? Like exactly like you said, how did you feel that you could do that on your own?
Absolutely. All right, cool. Well, Amanda, it was a great pleasure talking to you. Any last words for the audience before we close?
No, I think this was great. We covered a lot, and I really appreciate you having me on your show.
Sounds good. And guys, you know, WhitakerWealth.com is the place to go to find Amanda and her whole crew. So thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you.